Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are looking at CSS. Okay, so CSS fundamentals for beginners. Okay, this is an extension from my earlier HTML video. So if you haven't taken any HTML video or you haven't written any HTML before, you should consider checking out that video on HTML fundamentals so that you can lay the foundations for this course. Okay, yes, so in this video we will look at, or we will learn how to bring your web pages to life with designs and layout. So if you are just starting out or you are looking to brush up on some skills, this course is intended to provide a foundation in cascading style sheets. So you will learn how to style your content with colors, fonts and backgrounds. So we will look at how to create layouts using advanced techniques, and we also ensure responsiveness so that your application looks great on any device. So by the end of this course, I intend that you understand the core concepts of CSS and have the confidence to design websites that appeal visually to your client or your users. Okay, yes, so before we hit on the text editor and start writing some code, I wanted to just look at some of the needs or some of the fundamental things you need to start this course. Yeah, so very quickly, you will need a foundation in HTML. So if you haven't taken any HTML course, make sure you do so. I'll leave a link in the description to an HTML video on this channel, so you can look at that as well. And the next thing you need is a code editor. So in the HTML fundamentals videos, we looked at how to install these two code editors. So we had VS Code and then Sublime Text. Okay, so you should look at these code tools and then download them onto your PC for the video. Let's look at some of the things that we are going to learn in this particular tutorial. So by the end of the tutorial, you have learned what CSS is. We'll look at some CSS syntax, look at colors and gradients, and then we'll do a practice project. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like, comment and share the video so that others could find it useful as well. All right, so at this point, let's look at what CSS is. So it stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Okay, it's a styling language and it's used to control the visual presentation of web pages, and this tutorial seeks to guide you through the basics of CSS and how to use it effectively. Okay, so it's a style sheet or a styling language. It's not a programming language, and it defines the look and feel of your web pages. Okay, so it also looks at how your users feel, and that's what we'll talk about, the user experience and then the user interface, the look of the application. Okay, yes, so it defines how elements are displayed and allows you to add things like colors, fonts and spacing. So we can also look at the arrangement of elements on the page, create animations and transitions as well. Okay, so to start with our tutorial, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a folder on my desktop, and I'm going to name this folder CSS tutorial. Okay, that's where all the files that we'll be working on will be. Okay, so once I'm done, I'm just going to open this file up or this folder up in my text editor. Okay, so go ahead and open your text editor. In my case is Visual Studio Code, and then you can just go to files, and then we have open folder, and then you can select from the directory where you want to open the folder. So mine is on desktop and I can just select it right here. Okay, let me show you another alternative, which is to just drag the folder and drop it right there. Okay, and then we have our folder open in our text editor. Alright, so once we have our folder open in our text editor, the first thing we are going to do is to create an index.html. Okay, so the thing is, we are going to be styling our our HTML element with CSS. Okay, so there's the need to have an index.html file in your working directory. Okay, and then I'm just going to spin up a basic HTML page with that exclamation tab. If you're on Sublime Text, if you type HTML then tab, it should generate the same thing. Okay, and our document title, let's just put in CSS tutorial. Okay, let's call it CSS tutorial, and then right here we'll start writing our CSS. So at this point we are going to look at 3 different alternatives in which CSS can be implemented. Okay, so we'll open in this page side by side with our browser so that you can see what is happening while we write the code. All right, so before we start writing our CSS, okay, let's take some few minutes to look at the different ways in which CSS can be implemented in your project. Okay, So the first one we have here is inline CSS. Okay, so this is where your CSS is written directly in that HTML element. Okay, so you will define your style and then continue to write your style in that particular element, just like you pass in attributes to an HTML element. Okay, so at the end of the day, you have a mixture of your HTML and your CSS combined. Okay, so you see that you now have a very large HTML file that can be very difficult to read. Okay, and the second one is internal CSS. So for internal CSS, you define your style attribute in your head, and then within that style you can access different HTML elements, including classes that you can then assign the different CSS properties as well as their values on that particular element. Okay, so you define a style, and in that style you can access either the body of your web page or the elements such as headers and paragraphs, as well as classes and IDs that you might have passed into your HTML page, and then you can pass in your CSS properties, your selectors, as well as your the values. Okay, and then the last one is the external CSS. So with external CSS, you can create a CSS file outside of your HTML element. The convention is that it must come with an extension of .css. So you can either create a folder, and within that folder you have a file.css file within it, and back in your HTML you have a link tag, and this link tag will take an href attribute, and then this attribute will take in the path to that particular CSS file. Okay, so once you write CSS inside that particular file while targeting the different elements as well as the classes and IDs, once you save, your HTML file is going to be able to reference that CSS file and be able to render those styling that you've just added onto your browser. Okay, so now you have access to your external CSS file rendered on your browser. So the good thing about this is that there's a separation between your CSS as well as your HTML, and makes your code very clean, and it makes it very easy to debug and look for errors in your code. Okay, yes, so that is the difference between inline, internal, and external CSS, and let's get into our editor and explore them in code. All right, so at this point, let's look at the implementation of the ways in which CSS can be done on your application. Okay, so let's start off with the very first one. Okay, before we start, let me open our application with live server. All right, so we have it there as CSS tutorial, and now we are going to look at how these three ways are implemented. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So for the first one, in my body, I'm just going to define, let me close this and have our application wider. All right, so I'm just going to define an h1, and in this h1 I'm just going to type in having a CSS tutorial. Okay, all right, and you see our page is loading, and let's add a paragraph. Okay, and let's generate 10 text from lorem. So we have a lorem epsilon text with 10 words. Okay, and the first implementation of CSS that I want us to look at is inline CSS. All right, so with inline CSS, you define the style inside the element. Okay, so all you have to do is to define a style attribute inside your element, and it comes with this quotation marks. Okay, so you just have to add style equals to quotation marks, and that's where you write in your styles. Okay, so now if you want to write your styles, so you can add the particular attribute. Okay, so with this h1, let's say I want to give it a color of red, so you have color, and then you can now set your color equal to, let's say, red, and then save. Okay, so as you can see, our page is currently updating with the color. So you see that our inline CSS is added into the HTML element. Okay, so you can then separate it with this semicolon, and then let's say we want to add another CSS property here. Let's say we want to change the font size to 14 pixels, so you can do that. So font size, let's set that to 14 pixels, and then save. Okay, so as you can see, it's taking effect there. Okay, so it's just going to be the same. Let's say we want to give it a background color, so let's give it background. Nope. So we have background, and then we want to set that to blue. Okay, and now you have it. Okay, so it's just going to be like that, and then we can just even add a padding of 20 pixels all around. Okay, that's how inline css is written. Okay, yes, so let's I'm just going to get rid of this, and let's look at the internal css. Okay, so for internal css, all you have to do is to define a styles attribute in the header section or in the head section. So you have style, which will come as in like an HTML element that has an opening and a closing braces. Okay, and now within this style element, you have your HTML selectors and their properties. Okay, in this case, you have the selector. Okay, so you have your CSS selector, and this selector is then open up with these curly braces. Okay, so within these curly braces, you have the CSS property. So now have the property here, and then the value. Okay, when we're writing the inline css, you realize that we have to add a property like the color, and then the color that we are passing in becomes the value. Okay, so this is what we mean by css. The selector is then the element. Okay, so whichever element or class you want to style will become the css selector, then the particular aspect of that element that you want to style becomes the property. Okay, so if it is the color is the property, and the value is the kind of color you want to pass in. Okay, so yes, so now that we have our style tag declared, that means we can then access our HTML element. So let's say we want to access the header, and then we can just give this header a color of red. Okay, so red, no, let's give it a color of red, and then you see that this also takes in effect just like the inline css. Okay, but with this internal css, you realize that there's a separation between your style and that of your HTML. Okay, so we have our style in our header, even though it's still within the HTML file, there's some form of separation. Okay, so we can also add a font size. So just the way we did it in the inline css, it will work the same way with the internal css. Okay, so if we add a padding here, and then we set that padding to 20 pixels and save, it will work just fine. And then if we also add the background, let's give it a background so that you see the padding that we just added, and let's give this a background of blue just as we did. Okay, yeah, so this is how internal css is written. Okay, so I hope we have been able to establish the difference between both the inline css and that of the internal css. Okay, so at this point, let's look at what external css is, because that is the most preferred standard in industry. Okay, so for our external css, what we are going to do is to create a folder, and I'm going to name that folder css, and within that folder, let's create a file, and we'll name that file .css. Okay, so earlier in the video, I made you understand that this file must by convention come with an extension of .css. Okay, so yes, now inside this style.css file is where we are going to be writing the css. Okay, by accessing the elements that are written in our HTML file. But within our head section, we need to put in a link tag, and this link tag will take, I'm just going to click on tab. I have that option. This link tag, the relationship is that it's a style sheet, and the href attribute is the path to the css file. Okay, so in this particular case, we have css slash style.css. Okay, so we go into the css file, and then we are accessing that of the style.css. Okay, now if you write any any CSS inside this file, so we are accessing the header, and then with this header we are just going to change the color, and then we are setting that color to red. Okay, so you see that the update is the same as in both inline, internal and external CSS. Okay, but then with this particular one, there's a complete separation between the CSS and that of the HTML. Okay, so there's not going to be any mixture of HTML or CSS in the same file. Okay, so with the same way, if you set the background and to, let's say, blue in this case, okay, it will update. We spelled this wrong. Okay, so we see that our background is updating. We can set the font size, and then let's give it 14 pixels. And now we can also give this a padding. Let's put it on another line, a padding of 20 pixels, and save. Okay, so yes, so we've established the difference between internal, inline, and that of the external CSS. All right, so once we have laid out the fundamental difference between inline, internal, and external CSS, another concept I want us to look at is the CSS box model. So right here we have a visual representation of the CSS box model, and this is a fundamental concept that describes how elements are structured on a web page, okay, or how they are rendered. All right, and these elements are considered to be a rectangular box, okay, and this rectangular box is what governs elements, dimensions, and how they interact between one another. This rectangular box model, or this CSS box model visual representation, consists of 4 components. Okay, so these components are the content, padding, border, and the margin. Okay, so when we look at the content, it is the area where the actual content. Okay, so if you have text, images, and other containers in your web page, this is what represents that part of the page. Okay, so this is usually controlled by the CSS property of the width and height. Okay, and now the next thing is this space between the content and that of the elements. Okay, and that is referred to as the padding. So this kind of creates a briefing room around the content. Okay, so as you can see, there's the padding left, and this is controlled by the property of padding. All right, and let's look at the second but last, which is the border. And this line is kind of a boundary that surrounds the padding. Okay, so you can look at the border here, is the boundary that surrounds the padding, and so it's just not the pattern, but it surrounds both the pattern and that of the content. Okay, yes, so this is also defined, or the property that is used here is the border property. Okay, so you can have your border width, you can have your border color, and then even you can have the border radius. So this squared corners, you can define them to be rounded. Okay, so if you have to achieve a circle, you can use the border radius to get that as well. Okay, yes, and let's look at the last component of the CSS model as represented in this visual presentation, representation rather. This is the outermost part of the box. So the margin here is the outermost part of the box, and this is creating a space between the elements and other neighboring elements. Okay, so this is a margin. It will create some form of separation between one element and another element, or an element and the main page. Okay, I hope I made a good presentation on the box model. We'll look at it in real code so that you see what I mean by this. Okay, so let's get back to our text editor and see how this is represented in code. So for the box model, I'm just going to define a div here, and let's give this div a class of, let's call it box dash model. Okay, so this is just an explanation again, just to represent the box model that we spoke about in code. Okay, and let's just put in right here in our content, let's put it in there, let's call this content. All right, so once we say we have content, okay, now let's use the styling to kind of just explain what I was talking about. Okay, so let's go back to our CSS file, and I'm going to access that box model class. So we have box, that's model. Okay, I'll explain how to add classes and that of IDs to your page. I didn't do writing divs in your HTML, so that's how come I didn't cover classes and IDs. Okay, so with this CSS box model, we said that the attribute that describes the content is the width and the height. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels, and let's also give it a height of, let's give this a height of 100 pixels. Okay, so with width and height, you know that we are talking about both horizontal and vertical separation. Okay, and now let's give it, so once we add the backgrounds and that of the colors, you see it's begin to take form. Okay, so let's give this a padding. All right, and this pattern is just going to be 20 pixels all around. Okay, so this pattern is the separation between that of the content and then the border. Okay, so we'll see that once we add a border to the page. Okay, so you realize that once we added a pattern of 20 pixels, it pushed the content away from the rest of the content that we already had. Okay, now let's give this a border, and this border property will take a value, and this value, let's just say 5 pixels, and then we want a solid border. If you want, you can define a dotted border or something like that, and then we want the color to be blue. Okay, yes, so we want a blue border. So you see that our content is taking form. Now let's give this a margin. Okay, so this is the margin, and the margin is the separation between this our entire content plus the border and this neighboring element, and this our neighboring element in this case is this lorem ipsum and the h1 tag that we defined earlier. Okay, so now let's give this a margin, and let's call this 15 pixels margin. Okay, and then as you can see, it pushed it down a little bit. Now if I give it 150 pixel margin, you realize that this margin is both for left, top, right. Okay, so you see it's pushing it 150 pixels to the right, 150 pixels from the left, top, and then bottom. Okay, so that's how come you have it that way. All right, so I'm just going back to 15 pixels, and now we can just give this a background, even though this is not described, just so that you see the whole thing. And let's give this a background of light. Let's see, let's just take light gray and then save. Okay, so yeah, so now we have the content, you have the separations between your content and that of the border, which is your padding. Okay, if we remove the padding here, let's just test, you realize that now your content is stuck to your border, but with the padding we push our content away from our border. Okay, so yes, I hope this makes sense in some way whilst you lay out your pages, because it will become useful once you start to lay your page, to know the difference between margin, padding, and that of the borders and the content. Okay, yes, so now we will go inside and start styling some HTML element, and then eventually build our practice project. Before we continue, I wanted to take a few minutes to show you how CSS access HTML elements, okay, based on the way CSS is written in terms of the relationship between the HTML elements and that of the CSS values that you'll be passing in. The convention is you have the element, and this element is separated by this closing and opening curly braces, and then within those opening and curly braces is where you define the CSS property as well as its values. Okay, so if you have a CSS property for background, you have the background as a property, and whatever the background color, or if it is a background image, whatever the image is, will be passed in as the value. Now there are types of CSS selectors, okay, and we have these are the four that I've listed here. We have, first of all, the type selector, and I'm using this basic convention in which CSS is implemented with element, property, and value to explain kind of the first one, which is the type selector. This type selector takes in the element, so that element could be an H1, it could be a paragraph or an article, and within that article, with this opening and closing braces is where you define CSS properties and values to that particular element. Okay, yes. So the second one is the universal selector, and this universal selector applies CSS to all HTML elements on that particular page. So this universal selector targets all elements of HTML on your page. Okay, now the common thing people mostly do is to just set the padding and the margin of your web page to 0 from the foundation so that you can just start working from there. Okay, so yeah, so this you usually see padding 0, margin 0 on your CSS code, or maybe if you are reading someone's CSS code, it just gives the whole page a padding of 0 and a margin of 0 so that the person can just start working from there. Okay, so the way this is defined is you have this asterisk, and this has an opening and closing curly braces, and within that we have the property and the value as well. Let's look at the other types of CSS selector, which is the ID selector. Okay, so in your CSS you may apply some unique IDs to certain parts of your page, and these IDs, in order to access them in CSS, you have this hash followed by the name of that particular ID, and then it's just the same format. You have the curly braces, opening and closing, and then you pass in the property alongside its value. Okay, we will get into code and we'll look at how to use each and every one of these type of CSS selectors. And the last one we have here is the class selector. Okay, so this targets different classes in your page. Okay, so you will have a dot syntax with the name of the class, and then just the same, you have your opening and closing curly braces, a CSS property alongside with its value, and then you will see that style take effect on the page or on this particular element or class that you have added it to. So I hope this makes sense. If you didn't catch it earlier where I explained it when we did internal CSS, I hope this kind of gives you a new perspective as to how to write your CSS and access different classes as well as IDs. Alright, so at this point we are going to lay out a basic web page and then style it so that we kind of get an understanding of what we have been going through over the past few minutes. So what I'm going to do here is I'll get rid of this content that we had in the earlier section of the video. So I'll just go ahead and delete all the content of the body, and now what I'm going to do is to lay out a web page. Okay, so for every web page you have a nav or a navigation, and so I'm going to define a nav. Okay, and this navigation is going to take in some unordered list. Okay, so we have a UL, and this UL will take in an li, and this lis is going to take the link elements. Okay, so this anchor tags, okay, which is the links, would now lead you to other parts of the page. Okay, so for now these links will go nowhere, and I'm just going to type this in home. Okay, so you have your home, about, and contact. Okay, so let me copy that 3 more, and this will be my about page, and then the last one is the contact. Okay, right beneath my navigation I want to have a div, and this div is just going to surround the rest of the content that I want to write on my page. Okay, so the navigation is kind of separated from the rest of my contents page. Okay, so let me call this a div. Okay, and this div, let's give it a class of container. Let's give this container. Okay, and this is a common class used in most of HTML elements. Okay, now before I even proceed, let me show you a quick way to just generate a div with a class. Once you put a dot, okay, and then you just add the name of the class. So in this case the name of the class is a container. Okay, yes, and hit tab. That generates a div with a class of container. Okay, Now within this div with the class of container, I want to have a paragraph tag, and for the purpose of the video, let's just put in lorem 20. That generates 20 text, or 20 word text of lorem ipsum. And then the next thing is our button. So we want to have a button within our container element. So for that, I can also have a div. So, and I'm going to call this button. Okay. Yes, so for the purpose of the tutorial, we can just call it button. Right after this button div, let's have our forms. Okay, so you can have an HTML5 form semantic tag, and forms take in an action, and this action will take in the path to the where you want to submit the form, and then a method. Okay, but we are just going to leave that out of the way and continue with the rest of the form inputs. Okay, so we will have an input, and we'll have an input for your name, email, and a text area which takes in a message. Okay, so this is the input, the type of text. Let's give it a placeholder of enter your name. Okay, let's just say enter your name, and then I'll copy this and push that back. Supposed to copy it, so so we have enter your name. This should be enter your email. All right, so this is all HTML stuff. Okay, we would look at styling it soon in CSS. With this, let me add in the text area. Okay, so if you have a form, you usually will have a form name, email, and that of the message that you are trying to send through that form. Okay, and that message area is what we define as a text area. Okay, so we have text area. You don't also need to add an ID, but I want to add an attribute called row. Okay, and let's set this to 5. Let's give it a placeholder. Now you can give it an ID. Okay, and then you can access that ID for styling purposes. Okay, so just enter your message and whatever that message is. Okay, and then right beneath our message, we want to have a submit button. Okay, so we can have a button right here, and that button will have a type of submit, and let's say submit, and let's put in the text right here of submit. Okay, all right, so we have our basic web page laid out. Okay, so you can see here our page is not styled. Okay, but let's get into our CSS and begin to write our styling. So we explain classes. So this is how you define a class in HTML, and then the next thing is the ID. Okay, so you realize that in our text area we added an ID, so you have ID equal to, just as you have class equal to the quotation marks, and then you put in the name of the class that you are passing in. Okay, yes, so now let's write our CSS. All right, so at this point we are going to start styling our web page. Okay, so we will start from the navigation and then work our way downwards. Okay, let's set up some base styling for our page. Okay, so anytime you open any CSS and you start reading the CSS code and you see this asterisk, this is the universal styling that I spoke about, that has that it can be used as a way to target some elements in your CSS. Okay, but this applies styling to the entire page. Okay, yeah, or all the elements on your page. All right, so we are just going to set the margin and padding of your web page to 0, and then we'll work from there. And now we will set the padding as well to 0. Margin 0. Let's give a padding of 0. Let's give it a box sizing of border box. Okay, and let's call it border box. And the next thing we are going to style here is the body of our web page. Okay, so to access the body, so if we open our HTML app, you realize that the body is right here, so everything within this body is what we are styling. Okay, yes. So to access that body element, you can just go ahead and call it in body and curly braces, then you can add your CSS properties as well as their values. Okay, so now what we are going to do is, let's give it a font family, and this font family, I'm going to make it Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif. Okay, so depending on any of them will load. Okay, but then we want sans serif to load. Okay, so let me just get rid of the Helvetica and we will have only the sans serif. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to set the line height of the entire body to 1.6 rem. Okay, let's give it a line height of 1.6 rem. All right, and what this does is it sets a vertical spacing between all the text within the body. So as you can see, you see that we have some. Now let me get rid of it so that you see the effect on the page of and let me cut it off, so you can see that once we take it off, we don't have that vertical spacing between all the text within the body. Okay, and once we return it, you see that we have some vertical spacing between all the text we have in our body. Okay, yeah, so I hope that makes sense. And then the next thing is, let's give it a background color. That's color. Okay, and this background color is a hex value, so we have f4 f4 f9. Okay, so this is the hex value that this is a some shade of gray, I think. So that's the hex value for that particular color. And let's give the text color of white. Okay, so, or dark gray. Okay, so let's give the color, and this color, no, we don't want to set an RGB color, so let's go ahead and give it a color. And this color, we have this right here. Okay, so just have a darker color. Okay, all right, so once we are done with the body of our web page, after we've added the background, set the line height, the next thing we will start styling is our navigation bar. Okay, so we want to lay our navigation bar up like you will usually see in any website. Okay, so to access that, we will call in our nav bar or our navigation, and I'm going to give this a background color. Okay, and let's make it blue color. So this is the hex value. We have 00, and then it should be 55b 5bb, and I think 5. Okay, yeah, so there we have our background. Okay, now the next thing we are going to access after the nav bar, let me check here in our HTML document. After the nav is this unordered list. Okay, so access each and every one of them. So access the unordered list before we go through the LIs and that of the links. So I'm going to access it with nav and the UL, and this makes us to access all ULs within the nav element. Okay, now if you look at our page, we only have one set of ULs within the whole page. Okay, but there are times where you've written an application and there are so many ULs, and you can apply some global styling. Okay, so now what happens is that anytime you, let's say in our CSS, I'm just going to put that right here, I access the UL element and I apply styling. This styling will be applied to all ULs within your web, your HTML page. Okay, so this one we have just one set of UL. Okay, but then if you want to separate your code, okay, so that you know what code does what, and make it more readable, you have your navigation, and then you are accessing only those navigations or those ULs within the navigation. Okay, but there's a common thing where ULs come with this bullet points. Is because we added a margin and padding of 0. We've pushed the code a bit so you wouldn't see those bullet points, but these LIs and ULs as well as the links all come with some base styling, so you can add some global styles that sets up a tone for the rest of them. Okay, so you want to take off the underline, you can do that. You want all your li or your ULs to be a color of white, you can just do that, and that will be set as a global styling, and it will get applied to all of them within your page. Okay, but if you don't want to do that, you can access them individually in your page and apply your styling. So I'm going to give this a list style of 9. Okay, and that gets rid of the bullet points that I was talking about. You can't see it because we pushed it back, and now we want to display this to flex. And once we are done here, we want to justify the content to the right. Okay, we have to justify content, and then let's go to the right. Okay, and as you can see, we have pushed all our UL elements to the right. Okay, so you can go with center or left depending on your preference. Okay, so we'll put it on center, we have them in the middle right there. All right, and now we want to give this a padding of 0.5 rems. Okay, so let's give it a padding, and let's give this 0.5 rems. Okay, so now you see that we have some padding in our nav element. Okay, now the next thing we are going to access is the list items. Okay, so just with the UL, we can also have a nav, and we have all the ULs, UL li tags, and then within this we just want to give it a margin of 0.1 rem, or let's give it a margin of 0 left and right and 1 rem. All right, so it's a margin of 0 and 1 rem left and right. Okay, our links are looking better now, and let's target the anchor tags. Okay, so we have our nav once again, we have the UL lia. Okay, you realize that we have a nav, and within it we have a UL, and then we have the list items, and then within the list items we have our anchor tag. Okay, this will work fine because we have only one link. I think if you just put in your link item like this and add your styling, so let's say we give it a color of white, and white is 3F, you see that it takes effect. Okay, and it will be the same if we just added our nav UL lis. Okay, this will still work just the same. Okay, so as you can see, it takes effect. Okay, now anytime you apply a style like that, it access all the link elements in your page and applies that styling. Okay, so if you don't want that to be applied, that's where you kind of access them individual like this and apply your style. All right, now let's take the text decoration to none. So we have this underline that we don't want to see on our link item, so let's set that text decoration to none. And now we have gotten rid of those underlines on the list items or the anchor tag. Now that we are done with our link items, the styling, this is okay, but you can add a hover effect on this. So a hover effect is when you move your mouse on the link items what you want to see. What I'm going to do is, let's just do it like we've been doing, and I want on hover, let's see, colon, this is how you write it. So you have colon hover. All right, so this is how it's written, and what I want to do is on a hover effect, I want to change our mouse pointer to a cursor, so it's rather cursor, and we want to set the cursor to pointer. Okay, now when you hover on it, all right, so now when you hover on it, you realize that our mouse turns into a pointer. Yeah, just like that finger right there. And let's give it a text decoration of underline. We can do that, and let's give it underline, and then when you hover on it, you get an underline. Let's refresh. Okay, so now when we hover on it, we get this underline. I think this is it for the nav and that of the link items that are within the nav. Now that we are done with our navigation, the next thing we are going to style here is our container class. Okay, so if you go into your HTML, your container class is where that is the div that contains the rest of the page. Okay, so it has the paragraph, the buttons, and that of the submit as well as the form. Okay, so that's what we are going to style. So we are going to style that entire section of the page. So let's access the div with the class of container, and this is how it will be done. And let's give this a max width of 800 pixels. Okay, so max width, let's give it 800 pixels, and let's give it a margin of two rem top and bottom, and that of auto on the left and right. Okay, so margin two rem and auto left and right. Okay, so this gives it some separation between the nav and that of the container. Okay, now the next thing we are going to do is to give it a pattern of two rem all around. So left, but left, right and bottom should be given as two rem. Okay, this gives it some space between the left, the right and that of the top part. Okay, now let's give it a background color so that we kind of see some separation there as well. So let's give it a background of white, and as you can see it takes effect right here. So let me just move this backwards so that you kind of see this. So you see that now our container is taking shape, is being defined in this container that we have given a background of white. Okay, now let's give it a, let's say a border radius. Let's give it a border radius, that's radius, and let's give that border radius of 5 pixels. Okay, now it's very difficult to see right here, but if we move it, you realize that we have some little bit of rounded corners at the end. Okay, and once we add a box shadow, you should be able to see the difference. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to add a box shadow right here. So let's give it a box dash shadow, and this box shadow want to give it a 0 for both the top and the bottom, and then or the left and right, I think. And let's give it 2 pixels, 5 pixels. So we want the top to be 2 pixels and that of the bottom should be 5 pixels. Okay, and then for the left and right we are setting it to 0. Okay, yes. Now what we're going to do is to add some RGB color. So this should be 0 0 0, and then we should have the 0.1 there, and this makes it a little bit lighter. If we push this back, you can see that we have the box shadow right here, and it has only been applied to that of our bottom and our right, our bottom and top. So once we are done styling our container class, okay, the next thing I want us to do here is to style this paragraph right here. Okay, so the paragraph right before the bottom there. So it's a paragraph, we didn't assign any class to it, and I'm just going to give it a padding. Let's see, just padding of 1 rem, and what I'm going to do is give to align all the text to center. Okay, so I'm going to give it a text align, and then let's align it to the center, and then we'll give it a border. Okay, well, it's just a paragraph, so there's no need for any border. Let's just give it a margin of 5 pixels. Okay, so let's give it a margin of 5 pixels. Okay, and that is it for our paragraph. Okay, the next thing we are going to do is to start styling this our button right here. Okay, and that is with the class of button. So let's go ahead. So in order to access the class of button, all you have to do is dot with the class name, and then you just apply the styling. Okay, so let's give a margin of 0 top and bottom. We have 0.5 rem left and right. Okay, all right, and then let's give it a padding as well. So also give it a padding, and our padding will give it 0.5 rem top and bottom, and then we'll have 1 rem left and right. Okay, all right, let me fix this. Okay, so our padding is working there, and now that we've added a padding, let's give it a background. So we can add a background here, and let's give it this blue hex value here. Okay, so we have 0 0, and then we have 5 bb5. Okay, yes, and now our bottom is looking okay, but then the color is still dark, so it's not very easy to see. So let's give it a color of white. So with our hex value fff, and now our bottom looks okay. Okay, Now what I'm going to do is to give it a border radius of 5 pixels so that we get some instead of these squared corners, we'll get some a bit rounded corner. Okay, so that I'll do as border radius. Okay, and let's set that to 5 pixels solid. So let's give that to 5 pixels. Let's allow it to maintain the color of the button, and I think it has a border here, so we can see some dark area on our distance. So let's set the border to none. Okay, so that we get rid of that border. All right, yes, and now we've gotten rid of that dark outline that you are seeing on the button there. Okay, yes, so on hover, I want you to, whenever you hover on this button, I want a different shade of gray. So what I'm going to do is to just access that button class, and then this is how you add a hover effect. Okay, so you have the class hover. Okay, and on hover we want a different shade of gray. So I'm just going to change the background color to, let's say, a different shade of blue, and it's 73E0. Okay, so it's E6. Okay, yes, so we have a different shade of gray blue here. Now if you hover on it, you see that now our button changes. Okay, so we have a different shade of blue there. So now that we are done with this button, let's get into the form and the rest of the submit button. Okay, so our form was defined with this HTML semantic tag form element, and what we're going to do is to give it a margin of 2 rems top and bottom. Okay, so let's give it 2 rem and 0 left and right. Okay, yes, so that kind of just gives it a padding and then some form of separation between the button and that of the form element. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to access the form inputs as well as the text area. Let's go back to our HTML document. So now what I'm going to do is to access this form input, the text area, and then the form button here. Okay, so any button that is within the form, I'm going to apply the same kind of styling to all of those. So how I'll do this is to first of all access the form, and what I'm going to do is to access the form input, and let's separate this by commas. Okay, and then we have the form text area. Text area is right here, and the last one we have to access is the form button. Okay, all right, so we have form button, and now we are going to apply this styling to all these elements. So first of all, let's display block. Okay, now you see your form elements placed in a block level manner. Okay, so when we did our HTML course, we learned about the differences between block level and inline elements. Okay, so our form in nature is behaving as an inline element. Okay, by just assigning it a display of a block, we have changed it from inline to block level. Okay, so inline, when I talk about inline, this is what I mean. You see that our form elements are just they are one after the other. Okay, so until this space here is filled, the form will continue to be in that manner. So if we push it right back here just to expand the page, you see that our page, our form, our text area, and our bottom are on the same line. Okay, now we are using rems that makes the page responsive in a way. All right, so let's just return that, and then we have our form outlined one after the other. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is to give it a width of 100%. Good. So this form is taking 100% of the width of the page. Okay, so if we expand, it should just take form. Okay, so it is taking 100% width of this parent container. Okay, now what we're going to do is to also give it a margin. So this margin will separate the rest of the elements. So we have 0.5 rem top and bottom and 0 left and right. Okay, so I have 0.5 and 0 left and right. Okay, this should be 0. Okay, so now we have that separation between the elements. Okay, now what I'm going to do is give it a margin. So let's give it a margin, and the top and bottom will give it 0.5 rem as well. and yeah, we have the same. So this should be padding instead. Sorry, let's give it a padding of 0.5 frame. Okay, so now you see that our page, our input elements have some padding as well as our forms. Okay, and we already dealt with padding and margins in the video just right before this, where we took our time to go through the CSS box model. Okay, also add a border to all these elements. So let's give it a border. Let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid white or gray, I think. So let's say 1 pixels and want a solid border, and I think we can give it this color right here. So as you can see, we are eventually styling the page. All right, and now what I'm going to do last is to give our form element some rounded corners. Okay, so I mean our input element some rounded corners on the side. For that, I'm giving it a border radius as well of 5 pixels, as I've done in the other. Okay, so now that we have given it a border radius of 5 pixels, you can see that we don't have those sharp edges again, and then now our edges are a little bit rounded. Okay, so yes, that is it for the input elements. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is to now style this form. Okay, now as you can see, I want to give it some color as well as some background. Let's access the form button. Okay, and let's give this a background color. Okay, so let's give it a background. The background that we are going to give is that same blue color that we have. Okay, so this is right here. As you can see now, it is blue, but our text, so let's give it a color of white so that our text stands out. Okay, so now it looks better now. Okay, I want to get rid of any borders on the bottom element, so let's give it a border of none. Let's set that to none. We realize that whenever we hover on it, it's still just the same cursor. Okay, so we want to change the cursor to a pointer. Okay, not only on hover, but the cursor on our button should just be a pointer. So let's set the cursor to pointer. So in this case, whether you are, let me refresh. So in this case, whether you are hovering or definitely when you hover on it, it's a pointer. Okay, yeah, so yeah, now we have to add some hover effect on our form button as well. Okay, so we want it to have the same effect as this button right here. Okay, so on hover we want it to get into that same color. So let's call our form button here, and then we want to call a hover effect on it, and what we're going to do is to change the background to the same blue but this. Okay, so this shade of blue in this case. Okay, so just as you have it here, you also have it here like that. Okay, so as you can see on hover, we have a hover effect on the button. All right, so now that we are done with the form and buttons and the rest of the page, I want us to add one last thing to our page. Okay, so and that last thing I want us to add is a footer. Okay, and this is a common thing in most web pages. So return to your HTML, and we are just going to have a footer element, and within the footer semantic tag, let's put in a paragraph tag. Okay, and this paragraph tag, we want to have that copyright at whatever your website name. Okay, so because this is a practice test, so we have to get that copy symbol, you have ampersand copy, we have this right here. Now you can just add in whatever text you want to add to the your footer. Okay, so I'm just going to call my own 2025 CSS tutorial. Okay, and then I'll add here all rights reserved. Okay, reserved. Okay, and as you can see, we have it here. So it's copy 2025 CSS tutorial, all rights reserved. This is a very common feature at the footer of every web page. Okay, now let's return to our CSS and just style that really quickly. Okay, so now the last thing we are doing is our footer, and with our footer, what we are doing here is to align the text to center, line to center, And now because our page, we've opened our page in a like in a small window, you see that our text wrapped. Okay, but if we take that off, let's go, and then right here we move our page all the way. Okay, it's still on the center, right? Yeah. So let's align text to center. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is to give it a padding of 1 rem. Okay, so let's give it padding and let's call it 1 rem all around. All right, and let's give it a background of some dark color. Okay, so let's give it a background and let's give it this background color. All right, so now that we have this background color, let's give it a color of white. So let's give it a color of white so that we can see our text there. So okay, so now our background color and our text is showing off very well. Okay, now we can also give it a margin top of 1 rem. So let's say margin that top, and let's give it 2 rem instead. That is it for this particular section of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Up to this point, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and like. All right, congratulations, we have made it to the end of the CSS fundamentals for beginners, and I hope that this video helps you understand the very core concept of CSS and HTML. Okay, that's how come we wrote a little bit of HTML in the course. Okay, and then we looked at how to lay out this page. Okay, now I just realized that this section of the video, that's the footer, was not displaying so that you could see. Instead of recording it all over again, what I'm going to do is to give this a margin bottom. So I'm going to my body and I'm going to give it a margin bottom of 200 pixels. Okay, and when I save, I think I can now scroll and this part of the page shows right here. Yeah, once again, congratulations for making it to the end of the video. I hope that this video helps you understand the very core concepts of CSS, and I'll see you in my next tutorial. Have a nice day.